For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And we have that John 3:16, it's so central to our faith. It's the entire faith story wrapped up in one verse. But the reason for the faith story comes in the verse after. Because God did not send his Son to condemn the world. No, he sent his Son to save it. And one of the reasons that we see that, or one of the ways that we see that, is actually looking before he even walked on this earth. Would you believe me if I said that? Yeah? Well, today we're going to be talking about the genealogy of Jesus. His family line, right? Do we know what I'm talking about when I say the genealogy? The people that he came through. When you trace it back, he was the son of him, was the son of him, was the son of him. I'm talking about that. And how the genealogy of Jesus actually shows how he did not come to condemn the world, but to save it. Let's get into it. Let me go ahead and just start reading, starting at Matthew 1. And I'm only going to read 6 verses. I'm not going to do the whole thing. We're just going to read probably about half or a third of it. Let's go ahead and start. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Aminadab, Aminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. We recognize some of those names, right? Well, whether you do or you don't, I'm going to go ahead and do a small little dive into just a few of them. And let's start off with Abraham. Now, Abraham's one of my favorites because he wasn't supposed to be here, really. Think about Abraham, and he has this wife, this wonderful wife named Sarah. We actually have a Sarah in the crowd, so that's cool. But Sarah, there was something up with Sarah. Sarah was not able to conceive. She couldn't have kids. And so one day, God comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, I'm going to give you a child. Actually, I'm going to make you the father of many nations. And it had come so far that Abraham's first response was, but God, Sarah can't have kids. And that's what he said to God. But God said, hey, I'm not a God that's confined by those kinds of things. And so after years and years of waiting, it was a while, and think of how Abraham felt after those years of God gave him a promise, but nothing happened, until all of a sudden one day, when Sarah was 99 years old. Not only could she not conceive up until this point, she was, how do I say this? She was old at this point too. But at 99 years old, she gave birth to a son. And this son's name was Isaac. Now Isaac, we read very early, God said to Abraham, Abraham, you know that son that I gave you that you've been waiting so long for? Abraham says, yes, thank you so much for him. And God says, great, I want you to sacrifice him. What? Are we familiar with this story a little bit? God tells Abraham, that son Isaac, I want you to build an altar and sacrifice him. And so Abraham, crazy enough, he does. He walks up the mountain with his son. He builds an altar. He gets everything ready, including the sword. But just as he raises his hand, an angel comes and says, stop. Abraham, stop. I've sent an alternative. And surely enough, they look in the bushes, and a ram had gotten its horn stuck. And you may think that's a bizarre story. But there's a lot of significance to it. Now, I would never stand up here and say that Isaac deserved to die. But we do read very explicitly, very simply stated in the Bible, a verse that says the penalty, the punishment of sin is death. And so I won't say that Isaac deserved to die, but I will be the first one to say that if the punishment for sin really is death, then I probably deserve to be on that altar. And it's not an easy reality to come to terms with by any means. And I would say that hopefully all of us have come to that grasp. We've all messed up. We've all slipped. And the Bible says that punishment for sin, it's death. But the reason this story is so significant is because Isaac on that altar represents how that was our place. That was the punishment that we so rightfully deserved. However, at the last moment, God sent an alternative. And he sent his son, Jesus, to take that place, to take that punishment in our place, to take it away from us. Now, next up, speaking of people who got something that they didn't deserve, we have Jacob. Now, you may not recognize the name Jacob on its own, but you might recognize it when it's paired with its twin, Jacob and Esau. Now, in the story of Jacob and Esau, does anyone know who's older out of the two? Does anyone know? Esau. That's right. Esau is the older one. Why is Jacob in the genealogy here? Well, you see, where we read about the story of Jacob is that one day Esau was coming in from hunting, and he was hungry. And his brother had some food ready for him. And he was about to die of starvation. So Esau says to Jacob, "Jacob, please, I need the food." And Jacob says, "All right, I'll do it on one condition. You can have this food if I can have your birthright, your double portion of the inheritance." And Esau, with no other choice, he decides to take the food. And so Jacob steals his brother's birthright. He steals his brother's portion of the inheritance. And not only that, but later in life we read that he went to his father and deceived his father so that he could get the blessing. You may be thinking, "Jared, that's crazy. Jacob, he stole and he deceived, but he's in the genealogy?" Yeah. And it gets way worse from here. Speaking of way worse, we got Judah. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the character of Judah, but in case you're wondering, Judah got his place in the genealogy. No easy way to say this one either. Judah got his place in the genealogy by sleeping with his daughter-in-law. Yeah. Back then in their culture, what would happen is that the father, Judah, would marry off one of his sons to a woman, right? In this case, it's a woman named Tamar. And so he marries his oldest son off to Tamar. However, the son dies before he can have children. And so back then, they wanted to continue that bloodline. So Judah was supposed to send one of his other sons to Tamar. And he does. But the second son dies off as well. And so Judah now, he's like, "No, you're not having a third son. I'm not going to continue your bloodline." And that's how it ends for a few years. But later in the story, Judah's wife dies. And so Tamar dresses up as a prostitute, goes to Judah, and has kids. Twins, actually. You may be thinking, once again, "Jared, these are the people that are in the genealogy." Oh yeah. Let's keep going. Boaz. Now you may think, "Oh, Boaz, that's a great name, right? He was a righteous man. He did all the right things." Yes. And do you know who his mother was? A woman named Rahab. Does anyone know what Rahab did for her day job? She needed food. She was a prostitute. She was a prostitute, and she was in Jesus' family line. You probably didn't think that those two went together, would you? But let's keep skipping down to our final familiar name, David. David. Of course David's in here. David lived a great life, right? He was a righteous man, the man after God's own heart, the man who slayed Goliath. He would worship. We have a whole book of Psalms where he wrote a good portion of those praises and that worship to God. Do you want to know how David got in the genealogy of Jesus? Well, he's there because he slept with another man's wife and had a son named Solomon. And all of the other ones, it's like, okay, but this one, David, really sticks out to me. Because David, he had other children. So why wouldn't God continue Jesus' bloodline through those other kids? Why did he choose Solomon? Solomon, who was the highlight. Every time he brought up Solomon, you'd always remember, yes, that's the one that's the son that came when David committed adultery and had an affair, right, with someone else's wife. So why would God choose Solomon? Why would God choose that moment and have that be the moment that put David, a righteous man, in the genealogy of Jesus? Well, here's the most powerful lesson that we get from this text. You see, the reason why God did that is because God didn't choose to run away from David's sin. God didn't choose to try to hide David's sin. He didn't try to hide it because it made David unworthy. No. It was David's sin that got him into the genealogy. Why? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Because God did not send his Son to condemn the world, but to save it. He did not send his Son to condemn the world in judgment. No. He came to redeem it. And that's why we have a genealogy full of sinful people. Because he didn't want to cast judgment. He wanted to reveal his love. And I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions about Jesus that we have nowadays. I don't know if you can relate to this, but sometimes when I'm just out of it, when I'm going through a low, and I feel like I've been running away from God, and I feel like he's chasing after me, and I feel like so many times we feel like he's chasing after us with a hammer, like a judge who's about to sentence us, right? Who's about to condemn us, right? And that's how we feel that God is coming after us. But let me tell you this. He's not coming after you like a judge with condemnation. He's coming after you like a father, just waiting to give you a hug. He's not coming after you with a hammer. He's running after you with a hug. Do you guys know the story of the prodigal son? Familiar with it, maybe? Let me go ahead and read a portion of that, because this is a powerful story. We're talking about a father and his two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So the father divided his property between the two sons. And not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and squandered his wealth in wild living. After he spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son, but make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for the son of mine was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost, and now he's found.' And they began to celebrate." Here's what we have, the story of this prodigal son who takes everything that his father promised to give him, and he wastes all of it. And so he runs back to his father and says, "Father, I'm not worthy of anything else. Can you just hire me to be one of your servants?" And the way I like to think of it, the father barely even hears his apology. Why? Because from a long ways off, the father comes to him with a hammer? No. With his arms open. And he runs to his son, the son who thinks that he is unworthy to have anything else from his father. And the father hugs him. And the reason I love this story is because how many of us, just like the son who took all of his inheritance and wasted it, have taken every second chance that God has given us and wasted it? And so we go back to God and we say, God, I know that I asked for forgiveness yesterday and the day before, but I'm sorry, I'm working on it. Can you give me one more chance? Lord, I know I'm not even worthy to be called your son. I'm not worthy to be called a Christian. I'm not worthy to be a reflection of you in this world. God, I'm not perfect. I mess up too much. And you know what God does? After giving his son all of his inheritance, the Father still had a feast. And when we come back to God after taking every second chance that he gave us, he has another. He has a feast. He has a chance. He has a call. He has a call for us. And I know what you're thinking, but Jared, what happens when I mess up again? I know I can be in this powerful moment. I can accept the call, right? We've all had those God moments before. And then we walk away, and it's almost like as soon as we exit the summer camp building, we slip up again. Let me read one more story. This time it's about the disciples. And we all know about how Jesus walked on water, but not many people know that Peter did too. We're going to be reading from that passage. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Here's what I love about this story. You see, I love looking at this story as a metaphor for life, because we have the winds and the waves. Those are the trials. Those are the daily things that we go to. But in this story, it gives us a precedent. Peter was eyes locked, focused on Jesus. But when he started to focus on what was going on around him, that's when he started to drown. Eyes locked on Jesus, focused on Jesus, he could walk on water. But as soon as he began to pay attention to the winds and the waves, that's when he began to fall. Jared, what happens when I fall, when I slip up again? What did Jesus do? He reached out his hand and he pulled him up. And he is reaching out his hand to all of you today. And can I give you some unwarranted advice? Is that okay? Grab it. Take hold. And don't let go. Because last week I talked about a whisper and how God can give a calling and is calling you, but sometimes it just comes through that whisper. And he's giving me a calling that he wanted me to forward on to all of you today. He's calling you to be a part of something even greater than yourself. He's calling you to be a part of a revival here on campus. And I know what you're thinking, but Jared, God can't use me. Jared, God can't use me. I'm struggling with depression. No, he can use you. Jared, God can't use me. I struggle with anxiety. No, he can still use you. Jared, God can't use me. I'm too content in my sinful ways. I can't change. No, he can still use you. Jared, I struggle with saying yes to God. He can still use you. God, Jared, I struggle with my past. I struggle with pornography. I struggle with giving up control. I struggle with lying. I struggle with cheating. I struggle with consistency. Man, I'm struggling with God. Has anyone ever struggled with any of those things? Any one of them? Can I ask you to be brave? If you struggle with any one of those things, I want you to stand up. here's the part you don't want to miss. Because as we read earlier about the people that God chose for his genealogy, don't get it wrong, he chose those. It was no accident. Those were the people that he chose for his genealogy. And these are the people that he is choosing for his revival. You can take a seat. Matthew 9:13. This one's key. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. And I said amen to that. Because that means I qualify. Because he can use you, Abraham. He can use you, David. He can use you, Rahab. He can use you, Judah. He can use you. It doesn't matter what you've done. He's calling you into a new season, and he can use you. Do you believe it? Can I ask to continue the hokey pokey? Another step of faith. If you choose to accept this call, I want you to stand up. Because these were the people that he chose to be in his family line. And he didn't judge them for what they did wrong. No. He never gave up on them. And he is choosing to use all of you today. And you may feel inadequate, perfect. The title of this sermon is Perfect Inadequacy. Because it's in our inadequacy that he can reveal his perfection.